It is Dr. Akala Kama Art, the Power Prophet, coming at you live today via YouTube. And welcome, beautiful souls. Welcome, 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 and peace and love and joy and happiness. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful day. I can just send the blessings to all the beautiful souls that um, you're feeling affirmed, worthy, free, and that you're able to manage the things that we are experiencing now in some type of balanced way with self-care and community. I think we really all need that connectivity, that entanglement with others, as well as that entanglement with ourselves and our essence, our spirit, not to be detached from ourselves, but to really understand our essence as human beings on a planet in which we are all energetically connected. All of us are energetically connected. It's a powerful thing to think about that. You know, I was listening to something the other day, um, or it was on YouTube or somewhere, it's talking about return to unity. And, it just boggles my mind. Like, we've never been without unity. We have fallen asleep. We were asleep regarding unity, regarding our connectedness, the Ubuntu, which I know I'm not saying right, but that UBUNTO vibe, that I exist because we exist. Ancient civilizations understood this idea of entanglement, and what happens to the I happens to the we, and what happens to the we happens to the I. And many people walk in that, and there are cultures that have that today. Um, there's something unique about the region in which I take up space and place. And my son said something to me, and this may be rambling, but I'm going to do a teaching today on illusion in society, how reality is made, and how freedom returns. Okay. Doesn't really return, how it unfolds again, how we unfold into it again. So forgive me for using that idea of return, but that's also tied to ideas of release. So, and I will talk to that in the teaching today. So, um, I was, just a lot of things have been coming to me, and I sort of lost my point that I was going to before I talked about what we're going to do today. Um, Sometimes I think for many people, spirituality and the way in which spirituality is today, different from theology, different from religion. There's just so many ways to practice spirituality. And that's the wonderful thing. The spirituality movement has democratized spirituality, right? Whereas before, if you weren't connected with one of the major theologies, it was like you were demonic, or something's wrong with this person, right? But this spirituality ascension, this moment that we're in over the past decade or so, and now has just allowed people to build their own spiritual philosophies, programs, packages, plans, um, which is phenomenal. We are in a modality of liberating spirituality in a much more individual, authentic way, especially if we are tapping into our own essence to unfold into the spiritual practices that are for us. And sometimes it's not buying somebody's program, that's just what comes out of you. And in that, there's some terminology and things that people say um, that is confusing to people. And one of the areas that I sit in, not in confusion, but the idea that we're living in an illusion. You know, when a lot of people hear that, they're just like, "What?" I mean, it just. I mean, what? Water off a still? I mean, it's doesn't compute. Doesn't compute. Doesn't compute. You know, it's an illusion. Yeah, like a movie is an illusion where we have to. It's not an illusion. It is an illusion. It's a portrayal of events that are not real. So in essence, it is an illusion regarding the activity that's being carried out. And we have to suspend our disbelief when we go into a theater, right? We have to suspend what we know as true. So we have to suspend disbelief, the not believing, in order to truly enjoy a movie or a play or a musical or whatever. We have to suspend disbelief. I believe it's true. And then our emotions get all caught up in it. You know, we're like, don't do that. Don't go in that room. You know, oh my God, he doesn't love her. I would beat him up, you know, or she or they. Um, we have to suspend disbelief. And so thinking of the social reality, this place we live in, and I'm going to be local, you know, but this is, I don't know. I don't know if it's everywhere. There is an illusion everywhere, but you know, there's different degrees of the illusion, right? I'm going to stick to here in the United States. Many times when you tell certain people that you're living in an illusion, it is, they just don't understand it. And so it's interesting that the idea of suspending disbelief is actually part of our capacity to be functional in our society. And it's hard to do that, as I'll go into today, because I want to really get to the nitty gritty of illusion in like terms that are not woo 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 spiritual terms. That's crazy. I don't get it. No. And the power of release, I talked about holding and the closed fist. I mean, we are all holding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Except when we dream, we're released. And when we're doing something creative where we're into that, we release. If the creation is authentically coming from your essence, your core, your spirit. So, yeah, I usually have music playing when I'm doing this stuff, and I'm going to put on a little something, something, because, I need a little music, I mean, that kind of helps the process here. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, I don't know if it's too loud. I'm going to keep it low. Maybe you can hear it. What's it doing? I'm on 7. Let me get it down. There we go. Hopefully it's still audible to you all. I'm so glad to be here. You know, it took quite a while to get to a point, and I know I'm digressing a little, but as you will see from the teaching today, that the programming that we are indoctrinated in and through uh, takes our voice. It takes it away because we believe that we don't really have the capacity to share what we know, or that we're somehow not credible, We don't have enough education. Who wants to hear what I have to say? Which is real. Everybody's saying this. Who's going to listen to me? All this stuff is real. And it's part of the programming that we undergo. And, the voice is one of the most important components of our body, that our essence, our spirit, in addition to our heart, our brain, of course. But our voice is very important because it can speak, it can offer uh, messages directly from our spirit. And of course, we have to be in tune with that. But it's something that is taken away from us, particularly from women. Sometimes children don't feel they have a voice, and certain vulnerable communities don't. And I just also, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I also want to share that, as an ex-academic, you know, um, a lot of my understandings, or much of my no, in addition to other frameworks of knowledge, I have a wealth of academic knowledge, and you know, there is spirituality that can be linked um, or associated with spirituality. And it's not just the study of spiritual concepts through physics to make them true. It's that a lot of these books and things of learning, um, some of them really open up the aperture of how we see how the world functions. And when I was an undergrad, one of the books that profoundly impacted me at a core level and provided a core understanding was a book by these scholars, of course, white men, Berger and Luckman, and it was called The Social Construction of Reality. And that was the first time I've heard the idea of a social constructed reality or society. Um, and it blew my mind. And that book never, those discussions, that class, the teasing that apart never left me. But those understandings evolved as I became more aware of self realization through Paramahansa Yogananda, through the Self Realization Fellowship in New York, and as I attended seminars and read books on spirituality, it sort of bled into this idea of illusion. And so illusion made so much sense to me. But again, I can see why that concept gets so much resistant, because it seems weird. How can my life be an illusion? So what I'm going to do is go through this little teaching here, because I think it's important that we begin to really understand, especially considering that. Um, Unknown caller. Oh, I hate that when that happens. Especially considering the fact that much of what we thought to be true, believed to be true, is crumbling right beneath us, or around us, on top of us. And so I put up a post today, and it says, who do you become when everything we thought to be true or believed in, regardless of the value we placed on it, is crumbling right before our eyes? And what do we do? Death is not just tied to identity. Death is not just tied to the energy leaving this corporal frame. There are deaths, the burning down of societies, you know? And when we begin to see how the things that we believed in these institutions, which didn't serve everybody equally well, but we knew them, like the devil we know, and they're broken. Now, I could talk all spiritual, metaphysical about it, but that's fancy talk right now. You know, I'm a realist in some ways, and I'm even a radical realist. I don't like say mean things to people, but there is no sugarcoating what's happening around here. And so when we see all this happening around us, who are we and what do we do? And for me, I think the first step, or a first step that makes sense for the power of release philosophy and framework, is to understand just how much we're holding. And that is looking at the idea of illusion and then the idea of a socially constructed reality. Okay. I do have a diagram. I will pull it out. I hate to pull these things up with everything on the slides, but I still got to explain everything on my PowerPoint. But anyway, I want to begin with a question. What if the illusion is simply, or what if an illusion is simply forgetting that the world we live inside was made by people? What if the illusion was simply forgetting that the country we live inside was made by people? And as we're seeing now, all of it can be unmade. It can also be reimagined. And there's also in there a space for release. Across spiritual traditions, we hear some version of this idea, the illusion, unmade, reimagined, release. You're living inside an illusion. In Buddhism, it could be it's Maya. It's in mysticism. It's forgetting your true nature. In contemplative traditions, it's identification with form, like what we see, instead of essence or spirit. And so this illusion can also be understood by what some call a social construction. And so, as I've mentioned today, I want to bring these two together, illusion and social construction, not to collapse them into each other, because they are operating in different ways, but speaking to the same thing. But let them speak to one another, because when they do, something powerful becomes visible. How holding is formed, how it's maintained, and in understanding that, how release becomes possible. Right? Because I tell my story about external validation, and I didn't know who I was, and that was my worth. And people are like, oh my God, what if something's wrong with this woman? But my reality is speaking to something very true for all of us. I was just allergic to that, to the maintenance of that through me. And in that allergic reaction, I had to leave, but I'm speaking to the illusion in the book without saying illusion. So it speaks to a higher spiritual awakening that people have gotten to in the idea of illusion, putting it into lived terms and in the language I knew at that time. And it also speaks to people, to folks who are doing the do, who are existing in these ways and can feel that on a very real level. So it sort of pulls together those that have reached some sort of understanding about illusion and those who haven't quite, who may be asleep, and then those that just know that what they're doing has an external driver. And so What I'm going to bring up now is this little graph that I have here. I'm going to go through each of these areas, right? And so, we talked a little bit about the illusion, just a little. That's, that what we live in isn't real. It's created, it's developed to separate, contain, to isolate people from one another. People talk about the boxes we live in. And these are all energetic forms, right? These are all energies. All of this stuff around us is an energy. Like Bruce Bynum says, they're forces. And the illusion is made up of forces that maintain a certain overarching goal. Okay? Now, granted, maybe it was, I could get in the weeds with this. It could be an illusion because we needed it. Because without it, we'd be somewhere everywhere. Or we needed a place to stay. Or we needed to have these structures to help us. We needed these, these systems that are created by institutions, right? To enable us. Now, one could say that, yes, we had to contain ourselves or we'd be everywhere. Is there something wrong with being everywhere? Being everywhere all at once? That movie kind of drove me crazy. It was just in your face, backing out. I just couldn't watch it. But is there something wrong with being everywhere? This planet could take it. Anyway, so that illusion. So, talking about the idea of social construction, the first point that comes to mind, we think about illusion and that's not right, that's not real. What needs to be understood is that society is a human product. Society is a human product. It had to be created. And there had to be ways to maintain it. And then we ask, to the benefit of whom? In America, we don't have the longevity like some of these other countries. That's what I wanted to say earlier. And my son, who's 21, made an observation that some of these countries, other countries, have been around here for thousands of years. We've been here a very short period of time. So these countries have been here thousands of years. They weren't created with an objective in mind, right? America was created to contain prisoners from Europe. It wasn't created then, but it became a place to send prisoners from Europe, and it became a journey of Christians to get the heathens together, and then it was explorers. So at the belief that America was discovered, it was it was a it was a it was an aim to take over and and in many ways exploit and bartering, and it grows consumerism and killing. And then when America became a country, it was divided into South and North. But the reality is that America was founded upon exploitation. A lot of these other countries were not. Of course, there's exploitation everywhere. But America was specifically founded on oppression, exploitation, death, to the benefit of one particular group. And I'm not getting into white supremacy and all that stuff, but it was to benefit one particular group. Okay? So it is like it emerged as like akin to South Africa, apartheid. All right? So really. And so as a human product, it had to have mechanisms that were operative to maintain. It was a human product. Mechanisms help maintain the society. So yeah. So some of these mechanisms. So the norms, the rules, the roles, the expectation, the way things are done were created through human activity, right? These things didn't fall from the sky. Somebody developed these ideas. And the extent of the way these ideas or the way things are done, the extent to which they can be enacted or acted out. And of course, some of this stuff was practical, as I mentioned earlier, and then survival based. But the idea that society is a human product means that what we experience as reality is shaped by repetition and agreement. So things become habitualized and routine. We know the roles we are supposed to occupy, and then the jobs fit with the roles. And then there are norms and expectations about how you're supposed to act within those roles and those behaviors and those rules. So it's shaped by repetition and habit and by agreement. And agreement is found in language. The English language is extremely bereft of meaning, multi-level meaning. Many other languages have nuances and discrete things that can be specific to a certain situation or relationship. We don't have that. It's like our language is a block. It just is. And we have to learn synonyms. So, language is what communicates these norms, roles, expectations, the way things are done. It's an agreed upon language. And so these these rules, these expectations become active and real through language. Our communication, the words that we use. And so stitching together the meaning of these things through language happens through agreement. We have to agree upon the language we're going to use. And over time, repeated human action, as I said, becomes a pattern. Pattern becomes habits. Habits become norms. Norms becomes just the way things are. This is the first layer of illusion. And it's forgetting origin. That somebody created the society. We can't wake up and say, we believe that. I don't even know what that would be. I mean, I did it, but when you think about the suspension of disbelief necessary to act every day without understanding that everything we do has been set down for us to do just that. And when we get out of whack, they used to throw us in mental institutes, kill us, do all kinds of things to us when we wanted to move beyond the human product of American society. As a matter of fact, they they forced people to migrate here, hoping and desiring and striving through the most brutal tactics to have them forget their origin, where they came from, their language, their relationships, their spiritual traditions. So you gotta understand the illusion is our suspension of disbelief that everything that we know is a human product. And as I've said forever, that I came out my mama's womb. I just popped out into a prefabricated world. I didn't create an institution. I didn't make a system. And neither did you. We can operate within the system and the mechanisms to create something, but to make a new social reality within a social reality, there are those, and some thrive. But first, you have to, on some level, suspend disbelief that where we live is not something that's been here forever. It was created, strategically created. When we forget that something was created, it begins to feel permanent, sacred, untouchable, even moral. You could think about that in terms of what America stands for. Not in a bad way, but like in the way in which it has propagated itself, the illusion of itself as exceptional. Europeans knew that wasn't true when America started to come into being. They were all flabbergasted at what transpired here, even though they were probably doing the same thing, but because America is sort of concentrated, they were in utter disbelief, and there's books that talk about this. Okay, and here's where the holding begins, right? We forget that the society is created. People hold themselves inside systems not because they believe in them deeply, but because they don't remember that alternatives ever existed, and they don't remember who they are in respect to those alternatives. We embed, we invest, we stake everything we have in this system. And now we see what's happening. And this is not happening just by happenstance here. What's happening here is supposed to happen. Trump is supposed to beat down these systems. He's supposed to be out there violent like this. It is a wake-up call to everybody who has believed that this was permanent, sacred, untouchable, and even moral. He's debasing everything to be in his image, because nothing here was permanent. Nothing here was untouchable. I'm not happy this is happening, but it was bound to happen. And here it is occurring. And so, even though it says illusion, social construction is really taking up institutionalization and internalization here. So just know that. I should have made a better graph, but So repeated behaviors become institutionalized, right? And so institutions don't just organize life, they define what is thinkable, right? And they create, and these institutions are what create what we know of as our societal system, right? These institutions, education, I'm going to be very basic here. Education, Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health. We can think of so many, all these large religious institutions that exist for the predominant, and even some of the spiritual institutions that have now arrived, which is great. The ones that aren't really wedded in theology, but then they become sort of devoid of power once they enter this social control system that these institutionalized this institutionalization offers. And so all these things, the public health, Institute of Public Health, which includes the police force. The police were actually the very first public health officers. And you know why? Because white folks didn't want black folks or anybody that didn't like them getting into their stuff. And that was considered public health. And of course, it's emerged over time, but the root of all this stuff is exploitation, right? I'm not going to get away from that. But these systems, these institutions come together and they create the operative society, right? And so they define what is thinkable. They create predefined patterns of conduct. If not, you go to jail. Or if not, you can't get this job. Or this is how you succeed. This is how you belong. This is what is respectable. This is what is shameful. And the thing we need to remember again in suspending our disbelief is that nobody other than a certain group had the capacity to inform policy in this way. And you see how that policy is playing out with the way in which this society is being trampled over, right? See that policy. So they define what is thinkable, what is achievable, what is doable. And this brings to the idea of epistemic injustice, right? Epistemic injustice is when there is a one predominant way to make meaning, and it excludes anything else that doesn't sort of fit into that. And so the epistemic injustice here is that there was predominantly one way to define these things without real integrated feedback or collaboration with other groups. So these institutions create sort of a one-way view of how you succeed, how you belong, what is respectable, or what is shameful. But these institutions together reduce uncertainty on some level, which is why they are so powerful. I know I'm gonna get my Social Security. I know I'm gonna have my 401k when I retire. I know if I act like this, I'm going to be successful. I know if I speak like this, I'm going to be successful. I know if I hang out with these people, I'll be respectable. If I get a PhD, I'll be respectable. I know if I don't cheat on my wife or my husband or whomever, I won't be shamed. So they reduce uncertainty, and those are just some. I mean, there's so many things I could have put in there, but this institutionalization that creates our society reduces uncertainty, but then it also reduces imagination. So spiritually, institutions often replace inner authority with external legitimacy. I talk a lot about that in my book. You don't ask, is this aligned? You ask, is this allowed? Can I do this? And that means we become passive in some ways. Because if my connection was lost. Am I still on? Let me just check my stuff. I'm just making sure. Okay, because if we deviate it threatens the whole thing, right? It threatens belonging, right? If you deviate, you're a problem. And for some people that deviate, you are a problem that can be squashed, kicked out, fired with absolutely no care or concern. I mean, for many people, but for certain people, that's been operative forever. And so, who wants to threaten the belonging, right? Like for me, stepping outside of academia and then sort of charting my own path. And people like, there's, while there are groups of people that are doing this now, some of my ideas and ways, they threaten my capacity to belong with certain groups that I have been with. And that's hard for many people. And uncertainty is definitely hard for many people. But once institutionalization exists that defines the habits, the roles, the norms, the expectations about how we do things. Remember, all that is a social product. I mean, is a human product that most groups, except one, had the power to develop. So those are then systems of control. So we suspend our disbelief that we live in an illusion, a society that is a human product, and fall in line with institutions that tell us who we are and go along with that. Hence, we are being controlled by a system. We are holding the system control mechanisms for ourselves. So control doesn't always look like force, like what we're seeing in the streets now. No, it more often looks like approval, disapproval, credentials, shame, fear of exclusion, fear of not having no money, fear of losing your home, fear of losing the basics you need to survive. And then if you do, then you are castigated as homeless and seen as a scourge in this society. Go figure. But over time, this system of control has become much more refined, and much more important, right? So systems of control that we must follow. We have to play along. And if we don't, I mean, look, we see what's happening right now. People don't play along, especially when the illusion shifts and the language that we have used that we thought was happening, in a positive, uplifting way, then becomes the language of disparagement, right? So the reality that we suspended disbelief to just be, right? Society is a human product. And we are the social product, right? You see how malleable this illusion is. Something different. It could be something different. Something different. It's not permanent, but yet and still we sit and we hold on to this stuff and these things and the belief that they're permanent and they're real. And then something comes along to show us that we suspended our disbelief to believe this was real. And in that suspension of disbelief, we've been further duped. Somebody else has come in. Something else has come in to tell us, yo. Look, if society is a human product, I'm going to turn this bad boy into something that works only for me and my friends. Okay? That's what we're dealing with here. So I don't know why that's up there. Let me change this. Give me a second. I don't even know how that got there. I'm running my mouth so much. And so we are embedded in social control and social engineering. We're told where to live, where not to live, by how much things are, by how welcome we feel, by laws, and then by people's laws. So spiritually, this is where the illusion or the social human product becomes self-policing, right? You no longer need an external enforcer. You enforce the system on yourself because you done bought into it. This is where the holding on to these things becomes chronic. Not, well, it becomes chronic because survival has been tied to compliance. And I've said some of the reasons why. Holding becomes chronic because survival has been tied to compliance. So if society is a human product, we are the social product. The world we create, or the world that has been created, the society that's a social product turns around and shapes us inside. I used to study this as a scholar. The internalization of racism I used to study, or the embodiment of racism, and what that did to women's concept of self-determination and health. So yeah, internalization is real. And so if society is a human product, we are the social product. And from that moment, it is shaping us as a social product. We are taught who we are, what matters, what is rewarded, what is dangerous, what must be hidden, and what must be performed. So we talked about how society has these rules, expectations, roles, norms, and all that stuff. And then the institutes that come together to maintain these understandings. And then through habit and routine, those are established. But in the process, we are established. We are shaped. Not because we're pulling from inside ourselves out, but because we have taken what is shown and given to us and put it inside as if it was our own. And then we sit on that like it's actually real. And yes, it takes folks time to get to that understanding, and that is what the process of release does. We actually sit in this. I called out my attachment to external validation and following the rules. Yes, I did. Others, it's just natural. It's just the way it is. Not fully understanding that this is just the way it is has been fed to us. We have suspended our disbelief and ate the pie. I'm trying to come up with something profound. I don't know if it's working. But we are taught who we are, what matters, what's rewarded, what is dangerous, what must be hidden, what must be performed. And different groups have different teachings that become internalized. The process of taking that up, embodying that, is internalization. And so spiritually, this is a moment of misidentification. The moment when the conditioned self is mistaken as the essential self. And there's no questioning. It's just the way it is. We're talking about illusion. I don't live in an illusion. Religion's an illusion. The packaging of spirituality into a framework that is then taught in these huge spaces is a social product itself, used to control humanity, because the fear of hell? Come on. Who wants to go to hell? The fear of God, which places God external to us, instead of us being a representation of that divine source on this earth. And our relationship with that God has to be mediated through a pastor, a preacher, a reverend, and a book. And we are wedded to that book. There's a lot of good teachings in it. But when we become so wedded to this illusion of spirituality that is packaged, that we don't even look elsewhere for knowledge sources. Everything is in here and can be rationalized here, which is irrational. But we meet people where they are. So spiritually, this is the moment of misidentification, the moment when the conditioned self is mistaken for the essential self or our spirit self. Then we don't just live in a society, the society lives in us. My goodness, that's some deep stuff. And this is where the illusion becomes embodied. The illusion is not that society exists. The illusion is believing that the roles we learned and what we've been taught, the expectations and all that stuff is who we are. So society is an illusion that we take up, and then we maintain an illusion of self in terms of that external measure. And that's when the holding, the closed fist intensifies, because now release feels like a risk, not just socially, but existentially. Like now, who am I? What's going to happen when all this stuff come down? When all these things are destroyed? Our existence is at stake. I know this is a lot. So we're holding a lot. And, the closed fist metaphor in the book that I wrote, many of us don't even know we're holding on that tightly. And all of which we're holding on to. We are exhausted, burnt out, depressed, sad, addicts, violent people, mad, angry. Because we are holding so tightly onto something that doesn't even really exist. What is real is what's in here. Your essence, your spirit. But you gotta hold on, because the cost of losing this illusion out and the illusion in is existential. It presents an existential crisis. And that's part of the dark night of the soul that people go through when they release. So we're holding on to a society that is a human product. Somebody built this society, and those somebodies are people that had the most power. Period. And we are the social product. So we are created in the image of those people with the most power that activated the society and then caused us to go to sleep. And religion is really key in helping us go to sleep. Because when I was a holy roller, big time charismatic Christian, the Bible was true. I was out there evangelizing in bus stations and train tracks and wood barns and bringing people to Jesus. I think I was asleep. Not just because of that, because of other things that sort of start to prick at me. But, I woke up. And I guess being woke is a bad word these days. I was awakened. It was time for me to wake up. And so release is seen through the illusion. That is the first component of the release and receive readings in the power of release framework. Here's where this is spirituality, and it's a little bit of, some academic stuff in there, but release does not require destroying society, although it is falling apart right before our eyes. But the release that I philosophize about is the release that begins with recognition. That's why I thought it was so important for me to come on today to talk about illusion, society, and how reality is made and how freedom returns. Because we cannot keep connecting ourselves to this mess. There has to be a space where we understand that we put all our marbles all in one basket because we believed, and there's nothing wrong with believing, but we believed in something that was not true. So release begins with recognition. The moment you see that this was made, this was learned, this was and is internalized, and this was enforced. Once you realize this, those things and the ways in which those operated in your life, which the process of release and the philosophy that I share and framework that I use helps you get to that recognition, to how it's operative. Choice returns. Choice, real choice, authentic choice, internally driven choice. Because self-determination can be externally motivated or it can be internally motivated. Sometimes a little bit of both. But the way in which illusion, spiritual illusion, and this idea of a society as a human product, and its internalization, it's external that created us. So now we're the internalization creates the choices. So our choices are not even our choices. It gets really deep. But that is so important to truly understand. Because if you don't understand why you choose what you choose, and you just choose, that is a challenge. And that is what release does. It helps you understand why you choose what you choose. So the moment you see this was made, learned, internalized, enforced, choice returns. And spiritual practice gives us the capacity to step out of that identification as being a social product of being created. And release is like a self-revolution. Because it is remembrance, remembering who and what you are. You remember that you were shaped by forces other than this society and this world. And you are not owned by this society and the world that you inhabit. And from that place, something can shift. Unknown. Something can shift. And it doesn't happen all at once. It didn't happen with me. It doesn't happen with a lot of people. It takes a little time. But something begins to happen where you begin to breathe again because you're no longer holding on. And you may think you're breathing right now. I'm telling you, there's a lot of ways in which this illusion takes us up. But you could begin to breathe freely. And release doesn't come by just understanding, okay, I'm a social product. I'm just going to do this instead. It really comes from seeing the ways in which society has worked on you. So illusion dissolves when the fact that this is a constructed human product, our society, is remembered. Control loosens when internalization is named, the ways in which we took up the illusion. And the holding thus softens up a little bit. We can begin to open our hand when we understand that we are not what the society made us. And when that essence, that spiritual essence of who you are, can be reclaimed. Yeah. That's a lot. I don't even know how long this is, but these are important things to know. And again, it was my goal to really just sort of break down what the illusion is. And so, and so, what's this? I don't want that. And so there's an illusion, and a lot of it's tied with this social construction that we live in. There's institutionalization that creates our society. That's part of the social construction. So it's a human product. And then these institutes create systems of control over human activity. We are the social product. And we internalize all that these institutions and systems of control tell us who we are. We hold on to it. And in order to truly release that and understand and come to terms with the ways in which society has been embedded within you, is through a process of release. And I understand that people talk about meditation and the opening up, but this is about real work. This is about journaling, reflecting, discussing. It's a conversation because it's hard to work these things out by yourself. I've been talking about them for years in classes and groups and science meetings. So there was a bit of a understanding about these things for me when I started my process of release. But in order to understand what we're holding sometimes, we need to really have a conversation with others. We have to have a conversation with others. And that's critically important, that conversation with others. And so part of um, this idea of having conversations speaks to um, the relationship and release community on Discord. I mean, a lot of of understanding comes through conversation. I know this because as a researcher, which I did for over 2 decades, when you bring people together around a topic, the aha moments start to click and questions can come. And so the release and relationship community is the space just to do that. It's your space to think about the idea of society as a human product and how you have taken up that product and thus became the social product that makes the society go, but not so much through somebody banging something over your head, but because it's inside. Let's dig deep, or let's not. We meet people where they are in the release and relationship community to discuss these things because they are heavy topics. And the idea of releasing all that is scary. So the release starts in discussion and reflection. That's what the release and relationship community offers to everyone who comes. And there's no cost right now until March 30th, 2026. And that's because this is critically important, especially at this time. Not to discuss politics and the divisions, but to figure out what's happening here and how I can maintain my sanity and release my hold on what I thought was true. To release a little bit, talk about a little bit with some folks and understand what may be needed to shift in my perspective to maintain my peace and sanity. So at a very basic level, it's not about doing some hard work. And I don't know what people think, but we need a space to do this release. Okay. So the QR code is there. You go to the Discord. I use Discord because it's just a wonderful multi-channel venue, video, talking. I mean, it's just a great space. And so, but you have to fill a little application out, your name, email, because I just want to, I don't have a capacha, whatever it's called, where you do the designs to make sure that's a human going into a system. I need the email so I can check to make sure it's an active email. Thus, I'll be sending a test. But it's a private community to have these private discussions. And there are rules in this community. And nobody's trying to change you, pull a wool over your eyes. We're trying to pull the wool off your eyes. So yes, there's a QR code. Okay. We would love it to have you there. Again, free until March 30th, 2026. All right. On Discord. And also, I just also want to share, where I share this idea of me being a social product and the release process I had to go through. I didn't talk about the work that I went through to get to the point where I could begin to shed. But again, that happens. It takes some work to get there, to know what needs to be shed. I didn't spell all that out. But there's some of the stuff that we do in the release and relationship community. And so the power of release, journeying from a closed fist to an open hand, just gives an example of what someone internalized and believed to be true. My own suspension of disbelief. And then how I pulled myself out of it, but not all the details, but sort of just some of the stages. And this is under my given name, Jennifer R. Warren. So that's how to be on Amazon. So, I just want to thank y'all for hanging out with me today, whoever hung out with me today. And, this is just to enlighten, to bring some light or some understanding in some way, shape, or form. We're on a journey all together. We don't all have to be the same. But what one person knows can help somebody else. What another person knows can help somebody else. And that's really the idea of the power of release. A lot of it is internal with meditation and sitting and journaling, but none of this makes sense in any way if we're not unfolding into the unity and the wisdom within that collectivity together. And so I'm just a part of that collective. That's it. That's it. Remember, you are worthy of the best, most abundant, prosperous, joyful life. And you are worthy of manifesting those things that you thought were only dreams and unachievable. And you have the capacity to do just that, to learn, to understand, and to realize those things that your spirit is telling you is important. It's fighting against all the junk. But you can find ways to let that spirit, no, you have ways to let that spirit speak unto you and into your life. So thank you very much. I'm Dr. Akala Kama'a. Thank you for joining Feel the Power of Release with me today. And again, have a blessed day. Thank you so much.